Welcome to the Restoring Our City podcast, where we have candid conversations on today's topics to help connect our community. And we are in the holiday season. I am with my fellow co-host, Jeswin Thomas. Jeswin, how was your holidays? Did you enjoy them?
My
Do you
holidays.
celebrate?
I feel like I was your replacement for a little bit. I was spending Thanksgiving with your family, with your brothers, with your parents, and I still remember, man, your parents have a mini shrine to you, and the last thing your mom said as we exited your house was, "I miss my Joby." So
Yeah,
clearly, you need to come back to Chicago at some point soon.
I do. I FaceTimed my family for Thanksgiving. For our listeners, I don't live in Chicago anymore. And Jeswin does, and we grew up together. And I FaceTimed my family because I'm homesick during the holidays, which I think a lot of people probably feel that way. I FaceTime my family and they go around the room saying hi to everybody. And of course, Jessamine sitting on my couch, eating my turkey, sitting with my family. And your parents were there too, which is great. And that's not the first time that you've been over to my house for Thanksgiving. Feel like it's a rite of passage. If you've been to my house, like I consider you brothers and sisters and siblings, that's family. Like when they come to your house for the holidays, right? So I'm glad you enjoyed it. We didn't do anything, but we did go the next day to my in-laws for Thanksgiving. But it was fun. I'm glad. I'm glad we're keeping some of the traditions alive. Jasmine, I mean, you've been over to my house for Thanksgiving for several years too. I have all these pictures and my Google Photos keeps showing you in all my family festivities. But I wanted to bring that up today because it's the holiday season and
Mhm.
sometimes it's a tough time for people, but it is such a festive time. Like, what is your favorite part about the holidays? Let's just get that out of the way. What's your
Well,
favorite part about the holidays?
I mean, right now we're in between the holidays, right? Between Thanksgiving and Christmas. First off, hot take. I like Thanksgiving way more than Christmas. It's not
Oh,
even
yeah.
close.
Yep.
I think
Yep.
Christmas, in terms of commercialization, in terms of what can I get this year, Black Friday, blah, blah, blah. It's almost like so much about us. And we have to remind ourselves, like, oh, yeah, this is all about Jesus. Jesus is the reason for the season, right? But Thanksgiving, I love its concept. It's, hey, be thankful for what you have, shut your mouth and eat the food, right? Like that is the core of Thanksgiving. Be thankful. And for me, it's all about food, and Thanksgiving is the goat of holidays. I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, that's a great question to put out there to our audience to see if they unsubscribe because of that take. However, I think it's a great way to just even silence, you know, horrible like rhetoric right around the holidays. Just shove your face with food and you're not able to speak about some crazy opinion, right? Um, but yes, I agree with you. I think Black Friday too is just this weird concept. I wonder what the Indian equivalent is because I feel like for all the people who are shopping, I'm sure all the Indians are stingy and cheap, probably celebrate Brown Friday by staying home and telling you that this was never really on sale, right, to begin with. But I agree. Thanksgiving's my all-time favorite holiday. Love it. But I think we do need to start off this episode with a pretty critical question. And we do have candid conversations here. And we're Indian. If that's not apparent to anybody, if you just listen to the audio version of this and you do not realize that we are two South Asian guys talking on this podcast, we have grown up going and celebrating to these typically American holidays. But whenever we go to celebrate, there's always our uncles and aunties or parents bringing it home, not traditional American food, but Indian food. So, my question to you, Jaswin, is what is the Mount Rushmore of Indian food during Thanksgiving or holidays? What's the Mount Rushmore of foods for the holidays?
Yeah.
Indian edition.
You know,
Jaswin, you go first, and I'll try to send you mine and see if we can come to a consensus on a top four.
dude, I was gonna say no matter what, even if we are serving American food at any festivity, there's always a side of Indian something, right?
Yeah.
Here's my Mountain Rushmore of it. It has to be very simple combination and works perfectly. It's biryani with some raita and or yogurt. You put a papadum on it and you put some pickle. That combination cannot be beat. I'm staking my claim to biryani, papadum, pickle, and that yogurt. That combo,
Wait, is
that's
that
the
like
goat.
count as one food or is that like two or is that
That's the
three?
you know what? My Mount Rushmore is four individual things that are one, right? Like the Trinity,
Okay.
but it's a quadrinity.
Got it. I got it. You know what? I think I can't go wrong with that. That's a great mention. My first pick in this draft would be Puffs. It's got to be Puffs, right? It's
Nice.
just like the easiest thing. And you don't even have to ask anybody. You're just bringing Puffs. It's already on the group chat. It's someone is coming to, birthday parties. easy snack, appetizer, finger food. You got it. Puffs. Puffs is my number one. So second round pick, Jeswin, you are on the board. What's your second round?
Oh man, I was putting all four together, but
Oh,
okay.
you're putting all four. Oh, okay.
I'm
So
putting
that's what
all
I was
four
saying.
together.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that's four of my picks.
That's your four. Okay, that's your four. Okay, gotcha, gotcha. You know what? So I'll give you mine. Mine's
Yep.
puffs. I would say it's got to be Pisum. You got to have some Pisum.
Pie.
You got to have some Pisum for dessert. And then I don't think I think this is actually a traditional holiday food, but polypum. Like, how
Mm.
could you not have polypum? It's just like when you get polypum, like Saturday morning, you're sleeping over at
Woof.
your parents' house, or you like stay over at somebody's house, and your mom makes polypum. Like you
Oh
wake
yeah.
up with that instead of the alarm clock. And I think you know what the last pick for me. So I've got puffs, pisum, polypum. It's all peas. But I think the last one for me would probably have to be man, I don't wanna do dosha. I was thinking dosha, but it's too similar to palpum. But it's probably, like, something crunchy, like a snack, like wada.
Mm.
I'm gonna stick with
Yeah.
wada. So
Man, you got
so,
apps, dessert, and polypum with no curry on the side. I like this.
yes, yes. So, we will survey our listeners and see if are we totally off kilter here, or are you, having some of the same dishes at your holidays? But I think holidays are so important, right? Like this is so important. It's such a festive time, and I know it's tough for some people, especially because you don't have family or you lost family members, and you think about some of these times, and it really brings up some of these memories with people. It's
Yeah.
such a sensitive time, but it's such a valuable time, and I think if you're like a teenager, I was just thinking about this sometimes just growing up. Sometimes me as a teenager, even my cousins, they'd be like, "Oh, I don't want to go. This is so cheesy. This is so dumb. Why do we have to do the Secret Santa thing all over again?" Like we'd fight about it. But now that I get older, I realize, wow, this was such a pivotal thing that really brought our families together. And nobody
Yeah.
did it better than I think our parents' generation.
Yep.
They brought this valuable trait of hospitality. Hospitality is not just a secular type of, hey, great characteristic in somebody, but it really is a biblical principle too, right? So, like
Yeah.
when you think about hospitality in today's society, how would you compare it to like what our parents' generation has done? Like, how would you
Yeah.
compare that, Jasmine?
Yeah, I mean, even just thinking about American or Western culture in general, I think we think a lot about hospitality during the holidays, right?
Yeah.
It's literally like, hey, we need to up the amount of cans we have in the food pantry that we need to contribute to. How do we do this coat drive? It's a lot about how do we be hospitable and generous to the community that's around us. But surprisingly, we don't talk about it in like April, right? Let's pick a random month of the year. It's really around Thanksgiving and Christmas. But then you think about Indian culture, right? Like hospitality is everywhere. You meet a stranger at a grocery store, you say, "Come over for puffs." And we could drink some chai,
Yes.
right? Like for our family, we don't have too much family in and around the Chicagoland area. And so when we're not traveling, like we're usually at Joby's parents' house like all the time. My
Yeah.
parents will go there pretty much every single Sunday. They're more family to us than most of our family, to be honest, right? Like I jokingly said to Jason, I'm just gonna ask my parents to sleep over tonight and see what happens, just to see,
Nice.
just because that's what I did pretty much every summer. But
I
that
don't think
concept of
people would.
hospit,
Yeah, I don't think people would bat an eye. Like seeing you at like 6 a.m. if my parents wake up and they see you coming out of the basement, they wouldn't bat an eye, right? It's just
um,
that's how it is, right?
but yeah, I mean, it's such a different concept, right? Like in the West, we think about it maybe a couple times a year, and then in the East, it's just part of who we are. We wouldn't really consider it hospitality. It's just, hey, this is what we do. This is how we are.
Yeah. And I think compared to like American culture and society, it is really different, right? Because I think community and family is really emphasized in the Eastern culture and where we're coming
Mhm.
from. Like you don't put the locks on your gate when you go to India. You just walk into somebody's house, right? Like you don't have to
Yeah.
schedule an appointment, right? It's that
Yeah.
mentality, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, I think that's where I hope we're not losing that. And I think sometimes when you get a generation removed, you start to think about, like, wait, are we as hospitable as our parents? And are we actually losing the trait of hospitality? So, I wanted to dive into this, especially around the holidays. We think about giving and being selfless and all these kind of things. But I think I don't hear this a lot talked about at church about being hospitable, right?
Mhm.
And as a gift to be hospitable. And so if we had to break it down and uncover the layers, because I don't think that's far fetched to say maybe some of our next generations and like especially culture and society in America is not as hospitable as maybe Eastern cultures are. But why is that? Is there a reason if we had to unpack the core root of why people aren't as hospitable? What do you think that would be?
Yeah, I mean, if we I guess hospitality, another way to maybe frame it is how much do we show concern for others? And so therefore that's the core of hospitality, right? If we don't have a concern for others, that means that we are only concerned about ourselves in many, in is maybe another way to think about it. That has to be the core of the problem. And I would say in a Western culture that is very individualistic, that is almost our focus, right? Like, how do I climb the corporate ladder? How do I get that bigger house? How do I achieve yada, yada, yada? It is really ingrained into our culture, more so a sense of self worth rather than a sense of communal like concern, right? So I would say that's probably the core of my problem, but I don't know how you're seeing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to say it because to me, when I hear about why somebody isn't hospitable, it's like the root of selfishness, right? It's you are looking out for yourself and you don't want to put others in front of you, which seems like just a general biblical idea and principle that we should be doing. Like that's the gospel itself, right? And
Hmm.
so I don't think we think about being hospitable in that lens because we're always concerned about ourselves. And I think we make excuses really easily too because it's hard to be hospitable. And I think when I think of that word, I immediately think of having people over my house, right? Hosting people at my house. And that's just a form of it, I understand. But that's kind of the first idea that comes to mind. And a lot of times it's a really easy to make an excuse of why you shouldn't have somebody over, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
well, my house is a mess. Well, I have really young kids and they're going crazy in my work schedule. By the time I come home from work, I can't have anybody over. But I think about those excuses and then what my parents had to deal with over the things that I had to deal with at the same phase of life. It's almost like, wait, why do I have all these excuses? You know?
Yeah.
And maybe it is this selfishness that's in me. And maybe we do need to sacrifice a little bit more in order to be as inviting to people and have them enter into our lives. Right.
Yeah, and I wonder why is it that we have a perception of what our bandwidth or our limits are? In one sense, I want to be careful here. I think it is important to protect limits, right? Like there is only so
Oh,
much we
yeah.
can do, and at the same time, there's things that we can't do. But I wonder if us as a generation, we feel like we're more limited than we actually are because we don't actually know how to stretch ourselves. And that's something that I've definitely observed, and this might not even be in regards to hospitality, but one thing I want to commend you on specifically, Joby, and even Jen too, is around the time when people have children, you see them tend to drop off of serving, right? Like you might be on worship team, you might be a small group leader, you might be doing things at church, and typically you see this attrition just, and it's maybe a valid attrition, right? Like I don't know, I'm about to have a child, so let me preface this with this. I don't know what parenting even looks like right now, so no judgment to any of the parents that are hearing this that feel like you've done something similar, because I have those same concerns. Like, will our schedule be able to accommodate what we're doing now? And my initial thought is no. But one thing I want to give you all credit for is even in the season when you guys had Isaac, is the same season that you both committed to leading small group here in Chicago. And I don't think y'all knew what your limits were at that moment, but you decided, hey, we're gonna test them anyway. We're gonna test them and see if it's possible. And you stuck with it for years, even after having Isaac, all the way to the point of right before having Selah and moving down to Dallas. So there's this idea of maybe that's coming to my mind of we have this perception of this is how much I can do and we can do no more, but we never really test and see can we do more than we're actually doing. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And then you bring back a lot of memories with that example. And I think first and foremost, your ministry has to be to your family. And I don't think if Jen and I weren't on the same page about that, it could cause a lot of problems. And I think there were moments, I think of the Wednesday nights specifically, where we had our small group, it would be like rushing out the door, we've got some challenging times with stress and the kids, and you didn't sleep the night before. Yeah, there's always that push and pull. And I know we got to like hand off leadership and shout out to Eddie and Alexander, who I love. our co-laborers and that too, which was that really helped too to understand, hey, you've got this burden, but I think that's where the church comes in, right? Like
Mhm.
you are not doing this on your own. So don't feel like your ability to be hospitable relies
Mm.
solely on you,
Yeah.
where you can actually, you know, you can exhibit a great characteristic and something that's I can't tell you how many times I've run into people who are like, "Man, I just love those times just hanging out at your house," right? Like the kitchen table at my house, like everybody just leans in and just eating or whatever, and it feels like old times. It's because my parents were like that. They're like, "We just need the house full on Sunday afternoons. I don't care who it is, just like have everybody over," right? Like they're
Yeah.
very welcoming like that, and I love that. But you don't have to rely on just them. And then people start to say, "No, I'd love to have you guys over," right? Like there, you see this cycle that just continues, right?
Yeah. 100%.
So, like, obviously, there's problems in America and society today that people don't like to do that. Maybe we need to explore limits. Maybe we need to like rely on the church and maybe help us to understand what our bandwidth is. But it's ingrained into our culture, and I think we need to expose that a little bit more.
Mhm.
But then there's if you don't do that, what happens to society, right? Like I understand that there's people who can go to really healthy churches and they're like, man, it doesn't feel like family. It doesn't feel like this and that. And I think a lot of the key elements there is why you don't feel as connected to a church or maybe even a bigger body is because of the lack of hospitality. Somebody didn't invite you over. I bet you if somebody invited you over your first time at church, you probably get a friend group and probably be a little bit more ingrained. But I
Mhm.
think about, man, what would society look like if you weren't hospitable? It would probably look like America and how disjointed and isolated we are today, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what your take on that. When we think about like the potential of bad that can happen, like how bad can it get? You know?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we're already going down a certain path.
Yeah.
And I know we'll dive into the Bible here in a moment, but just like you said, in terms of, when I walk into some, we went church hopping for a season after we got married. And I think about walking into some of the churches I walked into. No one came up to us, had a conversation with us or anything else. There's a church that we actually attend now where immediately like you were greeted by someone, you came there on a different Sunday. And again, they like remembered your face and you're like, wow, this is crazy, right? Which is great. And then I think about like even Indian churches, right? Like, man, if you ever walked into an Indian church, a first gen church, immediately it's like, Morning, who are your parents? Where did you come from? Do you want to
Yeah.
eat? Do you want to come over? Like, immediately, right? Like, there is such a different level of hospitality that you've come to know and experience uh, in that as well. And I just think about, man, there's almost these two worlds that we've all been kind of exposed to, that Indian hospitality world and sort of this general Western hospitality world that we're seeing sort of erode. To your original question, Jobin, about how far can this go? The verse that really comes to our mind is speaking about Sodom and Gomorrah. So I don't know if we want to dive into it right now.
I think let's just do it. And that's kind of a crazy take to say, like, wait,
Yeah,
if you're not hospitable, our society could be like Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, are we
a
really going that
hundred
extreme?
100%. And I want to preface this by saying we're actually not going to be looking at the story from the lens of Genesis. We're actually going to be a little bit further out. I think often when we talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, we are talking about a specific sin that they had in terms of sexuality. But if you really go to the Bible and ask the question, why did God judge Sodom and Gomorrah? It gives its diagnosis in Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. I'm going to read it from the ESV here. It says, Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and the needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me, so I removed them when I saw it. Just 49 and 50. So when it comes to Ezekiel, he doesn't even talk about sexuality when it comes to Sodom and Gomorrah. He says the problems were pride and excess and prosperous ease.
Yep.
Do we not think those are three things that define America today? Our pride, our excess, and our prosperous ease. What's your take on that, Joby? Are we similar in that regard?
Oh yeah, totally. Right. Like I think that's And you could probably get into the economics of things, but like you're so if you're not aiding the poor and needy and you have excess of food, I mean, you think about how much waste there is and how much leftovers we have. It's like I'm trying to explain to my kids that there are needy kids. And I would show them like videos of like kids in India and they're like, wait a minute, they live there or they sleep there and they can't it's mind boggling. And that's the fresh perspective of kids. It's one of those things
Yeah.
that they do not know any better, and the only thing that's in their orbit is what is in front of you. And when your fridge is full, and sometimes you got to toss food because you did not finish whatever it was for this week. Yeah, it's crazy to think about that. There's people that do not have that, and I think the selfishness comes into play. And like even just looking at the Old Testament, I'm looking at like the Hebrew word for related to hospitality is hesed, and it's often translated as loving kindness or steadfast love.
Mhm.
And it's not hospitality in like a specific sense, but it's like the ethical like definition behind it, right? And so there is this level of care for others that I think we don't have, and we're so inward focused. It's a very me centered society where it's very easy to not be hospitable, right? And it's
Yeah.
almost like you lump your family in there too, and you feel like you're doing it for yourselves and you're doing it for other people when it's your family unit. It can still be selfish too, right?
Yeah, and I think it's almost like increasingly so, it's so funny when you mentioned, you have to almost try to help your children understand there's children around the world that don't have much. I remember growing up and when you watch TV, there's always a commercial sprinkled in that says, "Hey, help a child that's struggling in this
Yeah.
other country, get X, Y, and Z, and for X amount of money per month, you can help them go to like school for a year." When's the last time you saw one of those commercials?
I mean, I see the dog ones all the time. I like for
Right?
the
Even that
yeah.
one is becoming more sparse, but
True.
yeah, you see the shelter ones. But when's the last time you recall seeing help a poor needy kid?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. So
I
true.
haven't seen one in probably 10, 15 years. To think about that, is that a sign that we're becoming less hospitable because we see less of that and you see more commercials on pretty much any other thing under the sun? I think about other aspects that may show like our lack of concern for the poor and needy as well, right? I think about, the fact that I think at one time, our generosity was, hey, we have this obligation to say if you have more than enough, you're willing to like give in order to help your general society around you. But now I feel like we've abdicated that responsibility into like a political position to say, hey,
Sure.
my giving is now tied to how I'm voting. Therefore, I expect the government to take my responsibility of caring for the poor and needy rather than me taking that upon my own shoulders to do so. I see a lot of that mentality really creeping in over the last decade plus or so. And so I think about the fact of, I think 10, 15 years ago, we could probably say these three things were so true that we still had prosperous ease, that we still also had access to food and, we had pride. But I think it's increasingly going toward a fact of like we're increasingly so in those three areas and we're probably showing less concern for the poor and needy and more concern for ourselves and ultimately the fruit of that is what we
Yeah.
see in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? It's
Yeah.
not the root of the sexual problems in Sodom and Gomorrah that we often talk about. It's the fruit of these aspects really rearing its head. And that's what we're actually seeing now in our society as well, right? Like our self satisfaction in all areas of life is our chief concern. And it goes back to the reason why God said, I judge Sodom and Gomorrah is because they did not aid the poor and needy, right? So it's crazy for me to think about, but I do see that aspect here in our American culture.
Yeah, it's spot on. And I think even just looking at the title of this chapter and context matters, but you think about the word of the Lord came to me in verse 1. Son of man, make known to Jerusalem her abominations. And the title of this chapter is The Lord's Faithless Bride. He's speaking to somebody he is going to marry, like
Mm,
his partner. He's not like throwing all this condemnation on you because he made all these mistakes. It's like this is the person he wants to choose as his bride. And he wants to call out the root causes of pride and excess needs and things like this, where it can really corrupt you into not being a desirable selection, right?
mhm.
And I think about when you read that verse of what the sins of Sodom are, like, think about the extreme opposite our parents did. They
Mm,
weren't prideful in some of those coming to America without having anything, but then shoving all their brothers and sisters into their
yeah,
house. Like, no, I want to get your visa, get you all. I know this is not just my parents' story, but it's like so many. And I hear Jess and your parents' story. And like everybody's like, it's not a unique thing isolated to one individual, but there's this cultural aspect of sacrifice that I think our parents did. And I think about, are we losing the gift of hospitality in our generation? Yeah, maybe. Like, it's a convicting question to say, how many times have you invited somebody over to your house at your church? How many of your church members have actually
yeah,
seen the inside of your house? And
yeah,
especially if you're talking about like you go to a bigger church or whatnot, it's like have they been over? Let's see, yeah, well, we're kind of busy. We got some kids, it's we got crazy schedules. Yeah, I understand that, but like years can go by, like going and attending the same church, being friends with people and be like, wow, I've never been to your house. That's
yeah.
crazy. Like that's a reality for so many people, right?
Yeah, and
Are
and
we
I love
losing
how you
that?
kind of frame both of those things. On one side, it's us having friends that we see on a weekly basis that have never seen the inside of our homes, and then there's the juxtaposition of our parents having people live with them for years so that they can get
Yes.
settled in this country. And I think that's our choice is almost like a second generation, right? Like, are we going to model the hospitality that we have experienced through the lens of our first generation, which we often want to sit here and criticize for so many different things, but they have us beat on this 110%. Are we going to be like them? Or are we going to be like the culture around us that we believe might be becoming more and more and more where to a point where God doesn't want us to be, right? Like more and more like
Yeah.
Sodom, rather than being that hospitable culture that the Lord desires to cultivate. One example I think about, even with these verses, man, like I think it's just like so convicting to think about these verses in the context of almost like our parents, right? You talked about the pride aspect. When it talks about excess of food here, there is no way we had excess of food when you had your parents' siblings living at home. You think about my parents, right? Like they didn't have, the most well paying jobs and we didn't have the biggest house. And there's been times where, some guy from India is like over here trying to make it through school. And it's like, hey, just live with us for 9 months. We have us, our Amachi, we have a 3 bedroom place. We're just going to make it food. Do we think we had excess of food on like a budget? No, they made it work. You think about prosperous ease, right? Like, yeah, it wasn't easy and it wasn't prosperous, but man, like again, they made it work, right? They were willing to aid the poor, the needy on multiple occasions. I know your parents have done that too, Joby, with preachers that would come from India and just stay for course of a month. Their siblings. I think about my parents doing the same thing. Even recently, when I was in college, you're like, hey, this person has come from the Middle East and she just desiring a place to stay to do residency. And she ended up staying for a couple of years with them, almost like an adopted daughter to my parents. And just happenstance to just say, we have an empty room, just come stay with us, right? That mentality is something I definitely don't have, right? Like,
No.
man, I think about me, my wife, and my future child. Am I going to invite a stranger to stay with the other three of us for
Right.
a couple months? Heck no.
Dude, like as you say that, I think about my first job was in the city of Naperville. And the drive from my house to Naperville wasn't that long. It was 45 minutes, maybe an hour sometimes. That's like a normal commute for people. Just when your parents said that, Joby, you're driving too far, you can stay at our house at the halfway point and stay here so your commute would be better. I lived in your bedroom. I don't know if you remember this, but like when you were
Yeah.
off to college, I lived in your bedroom. And now I think back to this, I'm like, how ridiculous was I to say I could not drive an extra 30 minutes? But your parents were so nice and it just made my life so much easier. I lived in your room. Like, this is crazy, right?
Yeah.
But it's like I think about these things where like, of course they offered because like that's not even that drastic of a need, but they still offered. It's almost like this generosity is ingrained in you to say, hey, I have a space, I need to fill it with someone else. There's always like this conception of others that's always top of mind in our parents' generation that I think we don't
Yeah.
often have, right?
And one of the things, like, I am just amazed by them in hindsight is how did they figure out the money aspect? Here we are trying to budget for an extra kid, and we are way more well off to do than our parents ever were, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
And we're trying to figure out how to budget for just one child. Imagine trying to budget for a child, a grandmother, like two uncles that are just all living with you, and you're just making it work on a salary that's probably half of what we're earning now, right? Like there wasn't even a thought or a concern. It was just, we're going to make it work. And just like you said, right? Like hospitality in that sense maybe isn't just like an individual venture. It is something that is divine where God will prove that he is a provider as you open up your arms to do what he's calling you to do, to aid the poor and the needy and live counterculture in this hospitable way.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't wanna say that it probably wasn't a stress. We probably just didn't see it as kids, and
Mm,
I the reason I bring that up is because if we're gonna call on our listeners and all ourselves and challenge ourselves to be hospitable, just get ready for there to be some tension with your
mhm.
spouse or with your own finances or with your own, space. You're talking about just even the context of where you're trying to host people.
Yeah.
It's gonna be uncomfortable, and there's gonna be stress. If it was easy, everybody would do it. There
Mhm.
is some kind of there's a challenge there for you to be hospitable, but there's also some circumstances that you have to overcome. And I think the key to overcoming that is understanding what the fruit that's gonna come out of it would be, right? And if you look back at a lot of your relationships and healthy relationships, I bet you can trace it back to some radical acts of hospitality,
Yeah.
and it's missing so much. I think especially during the holidays, um, it's a crazy thing to think about. Not just the gifts of like I'm gonna be generous to somebody, but how can I be hospitable towards someone? I think that radically changes the conversation and even the depth of relationships, right?
Yeah, and I agree, there are probably a lot of things we didn't see. Maybe that should just be an episode in and of itself, right? Like, what are the
Mhm.
stories that we never got, like in on that we can see now? And just hearing about the tensions that probably happen in the background. But it goes back to the ultimately their heart was, I want someone else to make it here in this country more than everything else that I'm gonna give up, right? To make my life harder for the sake of someone else. And that just shows you how hospitable they were, how much they didn't care about the prosperous ease, the excess of stuff. They really did show a concern for the poor and needy to the point of saying, I will sacrifice so that you can prosper, right? Like I will give up my own excess so that you can have more than you have right now. And ultimately, you look back 10, 15, 20 years, even from your point, probably to see like, man, like all the people they brought over now have established families, they have children. In some ways like they're settled, but it all started with the seed of someone saying, I'm going to have concern for you more than our own ease of life at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, there's a really interesting quote that I saw from Christine Pohl in this book. It's called Recovering Hospitality as a Christian Tradition. And the quote says, hospitality is a way of life fundamental to Christian identity, a tangible expression of God's grace and welcome. I think that's a great way to say it. Like, this is the tangible way that you can see who God is, right? By opening up your doors and having people come into your house and not just entertaining them, right? But it's like this natural routine where people are like, I feel safe at your house, right? And it's amazing to think about like we could be that extension. And I think a lot of times we think of ministry in terms of I could preach, I could teach, I could be some crazy social media influencer or have this gift of gab, right? When a lot of your gifts could really be, I can host someone and I can have people over to our house and just be welcoming to people. I think it's such a great concept to bring up during the holidays, especially as we're in the middle of the season. It's like, how can we actually be a little bit more hospitable? Because if you don't, you can turn into Sodom and Gomorrah, which is kind of crazy to think about, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how devolved our society can become if you start to exhibit some of these selfish traits, right?
Yeah, 100%. And again, like you just talk about those stories looking back, just sitting around a kitchen table, having these experiences and looking back on it decades down the line and being like, those were some of the best times. And again, like I'm just thinking throughout all of scripture, right? Like the people that are highlighted were people that were hospitable. You think about, like the widow where she says, "Hey, Elijah, I'm gonna make a room for you upstairs," right? She experienced the miracle and like the grace of God, right? You think about the person that prepared the upper room for Jesus and his disciples, potentially the upper room where Pentecost also came down too, right? It was just a space that was opened up for them. You think about some of the initial church leaders, right? In addition to the apostles that were teaching and preaching, you think about people like Lydia that just opened up like a courtyard in her home and said, "Hey, let's start a church here," right? Like it is
Right.
just the opening of a door that was highlighted in so many of these stories, right? It's not like you said, these gifts that we tend to elevate. It was the people that are really highlighted and mentioned, even at the end of Paul's letters, are just people that were willing to have open arms and open doors.
Yeah. I mean, I hope we can make that list, right? Like, if you see a great pastor coming through, and I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with hosting a pastor over, your parents have let someone stay over at your house for an extended period of time, and all these great deep bonds that can happen from that. Um, but I hope we can make that list one day, right? Like, hey, this person opened up their door for me, and you never know what that can do for a person, right? Like just opening up the door, just giving them that head start, right? And just a meal and sharing a meal. And then you just never know what can unravel. And I think it's such a great conversation to have during the holidays is to say, like, what can I do to be generous, but exhibit the characteristic of hospitality? Man, and it's like, this is a great passage too. I didn't even think about this when we started chatting before this. It's like, wow, the society could really be on its way down if we don't exhibit these traits, right?
Mhm.
Thank you for being my replacement at my own Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. What a great
I'll
way.
I'll thank them for their hospitality, right? Like they're still
Yes.
exhibiting it today.
Well, you know what? It makes me like very homesick because of the environment my parents of shelter, created. Same with your parents. It's amazing to see that. I get sad because I'm like, how can I replicate that here? And I've got 3 kids now. I'm like, wait, I can't find time to do it, but we've got to, right? We got to overcome some of the
Yeah.
challenges to do it, right?
Yeah, and the funniest part is, you wanna come up to Chicago, and I actually wanna come down to my family in Dallas, and so we need to be swapping more for holidays, or I'm gonna send you over to my family's place, and you could be my replacement
There you go.
from now
They won't even
on.
know. They don't even know. Yeah, man. I do get homesick, but like there is a time and place, right? Like for us to be in a place right now. And I think that's a challenge too, right? Like some of you wish to be somewhere else when God's really placed you there for a reason. And maybe
Mhm.
it is for you to start those traditions. Man, I tell you, like I was FaceTiming my family and I'm like, hey, we gotta do Secret Santa. Yeah, my parents were like, I was the instigator, right, with all these stupid games during Thanksgiving and Christmas. But they're like, now we miss you. People used to make fun of me for doing all this stuff. But now that I'm gone for a couple years, they're like, hey, we got to get this back. It's kind of like sad that we don't do this anymore. Like, we have to. So I would challenge all my listeners, all of our listeners, just hey, if you're hearing this, do the stupid tradition, do the crazy thing to bring people together because you never know like the bonds that can start to build. And it would be really fun to be more hospitable and start to exhibit that. You never know how long it can carry for generations to generations, right?
Yeah, and if you don't do it, just read Genesis and see what happens.
Yes, exactly. You never know what you could turn into. So, um, Jasmine, I'm going to leave it on that note before we get in trouble. Don't turn into Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what we're saying. So,
Mhm.
anyway, be hospitable. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas to you, Jessamine, even though it's tier B for you in the holidays. Let us know what you think. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share our content. It really helps the podcast. And we'd love to hear from you. Let us know how the holidays are going. And if this is a tough time for you too, reach out to us. Happy to connect with you. So till the next time, Jessamine.
Till next time. Peace.